On a night when snow fell like shards of glass, a man who had everything the world could offer found himself facing the one thing money could never Bisolence. Nate Walker, a millionaire CEO, thought he was running from the ghosts of his past. But under the howling storm, he heard a voice so small it nearly vanished into the wind. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll be good." Beneath a playground slide, a little girl lay trembling, her whispers breaking not only the night, but also the walls around his heart. What began as a chance encounter soon became a journey of healing, redemption, and love that neither of them expected. This is not just a story about survival, it is about finding home when you least believe it exists. Stay with us and subscribe to Loss and Healing for more stories that will touch your soul. The storm had not yet reached its fury, but the mountains were already coated in a blanket of white that blurred the edges of the world. The cabin stood alone against the night, its sleek glass panels reflecting a man who could not find peace inside them. Nate Walker pressed his palm against the cold window, staring out at snow that drifted with the relentless quiet of ash. He had come here seeking silence, but silence had never been kind to him. It carried the shape of his sister's laughter, now gone, and the hollow spaces her absence left behind. He was 45, the man who could bend markets, who had made his company's name echo in boardrooms from New York to San Francisco. Yet here, in the solitude of Aspen Hills, none of it mattered. Money had no voice against grief. Success did not soften the ache when memory struck without warning. Nate poured himself a drink he had no interest in tasting, the glass trembling slightly in his hand before he tossed it untouched into the sink. The cabin was too modern, too pristine, too perfect, and every surface seemed to remind him of how empty it was. The fire struggled in the hearth, as though even the flames hesitated to disturb the heavy air. He thought of Rachel, 17, with a pencil smudge on her cheek, sketching at the kitchen table of their childhood home. She used to fill silence with music, with jokes, with cocoa dusted with too much cinnamon. That scent had been gone for years, yet he swore the cabin still carried traces of it. He hated that he could almost believe she was just in another room, until the reality of her absence clawed through him again. His phone buzzed, insistent. Tess, his assistant, probably trying once more to remind him of meetings, fundraisers, projections. He let it go to voicemail. Tonight he refused to be the CEO. Tonight he was just a man haunted by what he could not change. He leaned over the mantel, his forehead pressed against cool stone, trying to steady his breathing. Outside, the storm picked up, a howl that rattled the glass like an ancient warning. Restlessness forced him to move. He pulled on his coat and boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out into the night. The cold slapped him instantly, cutting into his cheeks, turning every breath into shards of ice. Snow swallowed the path in seconds, erasing even his footprints behind him. It felt as if the mountain wanted him lost, wanted him to face something he had spent years burying under contracts and ambition. He swept the beam across the trees, across the empty driveway, across the skeletal outline of the old playground, half hidden by drifts. Nothing. Only the shriek of wind and the crunch of snow under his boots. He turned back toward the cabin, ready to retreat from his own foolishness. Then he heard it, a sound so fragile it nearly disappeared into the storm. A whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom, I'll be good." Nate froze. For a moment he wondered if grief had finally twisted itself into a cruel hallucination. But the voice came again, faint and breaking, riding the wind like a secret not meant to be heard. His heart stuttered. He pushed forward, stumbling through snow that clutched at his legs. The flashlight shook in his hand as he reached the old slide. And there she was. A child, curled into herself, her small body trembling beneath a thin coat, her mitten missing, her lips tinged blue, her hair plastered to her forehead in icy strands. She looked no older than 7, too fragile for this storm, too silent for the chaos raging around her. Nate dropped to his knees, breath tearing from his lungs. "Hey," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parting just enough for a sound to escape. "Don't leave me." Then she went still. He did not hesitate. His coat came off in one swift motion, wrapped around her tiny frame as if it could shield her from a world that had already been too cruel. He lifted her into his arms, shocked by how light she felt, like holding only air and sorrow. The storm fought him every step, Snow dragging him down, wind clawing at his chest, but nothing mattered except the faint rhythm of her breath against his shoulder. The cabin's lights glowed like a distant lighthouse. He pushed through drifts, muscles burning, until he slammed the door shut behind them. Instinct guided him more than thought. He stripped away her soaked clothes, wrapped her in every blanket he owned, tucked hot water bottles against her sides, and knelt by the fire as if willing it to blaze higher. He watched her chest rise and fall, each shallow breath a fragile tether keeping her here. Only then did he feel the shaking in his own hands. Fear, raw and unfamiliar, surged through him. It had been years since he had let himself care deeply enough to be terrified of losing someone. Yet here, with this child who had whispered into the storm, his heart broke open. He brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek, his voice low. "I'm not leaving." The storm continued outside, relentless, but inside something had shifted. The cabin, once sterile and cold, now held a presence it had not known in years. Nate sat beside her, sleepless, every sense fixed on the fragile rhythm of her breath. He did not know who she was or why fate had placed her on his path, but he knew nothing in his life would remain the same after tonight. The fire had burned itself into a steady roar, filling the cabin with a glow that seemed almost defiant against the storm outside. Nate sat slouched in the leather chair, his elbows pressed to his knees, his gaze fixed on the small figure wrapped tightly in blankets on the couch. The little girl's cheeks, once pale and blue, now carried the faintest trace of pink. Her lips no longer looked frozen, though her eyes remained closed, her body barely stirring beneath the cocoon of warmth. Each fragile breath she drew felt more important than every headline he had ever made, every dollar his company had ever raised. He adjusted the hot water bottle at her side with surprising gentleness, his large hands moving carefully as though she were porcelain. The gesture startled him. In boardrooms and negotiations, his touch meant power, signatures, deals that shifted entire markets. But here, with a child who had nearly frozen beneath a playground slide, his hands were learning a new language: comfort. The cabin was silent, except for the hiss of the fire and the occasional whistle of wind against the glass. Nate moved to the kitchen, his steps heavy on the hardwood, and let muscle memory guide him through an old ritual. He found the cocoa tin dusted with age, and a jar of cinnamon tucked at the back of the shelf. As the kettle whistled, the scent began to rise, filling the space with something both sweet and sharp. It stopped him cold. He could see Rachel at 17, head bent over a steaming mug, grinning at him across a chipped kitchen table. She used to add too much cinnamon, insisting it gave the drink its soul. His throat tightened as the memory washed over him. He poured the cocoa into a mug but could not drink it. Instead, he carried it into the living room and set it beside the girl.
I think I did.
She hadn't moved. Only then did his eyes fall on a corner of paper sticking out from under her blanket. A notebook, battered and water-warped, clutched loosely in her small hands even as she slept. Carefully, he eased it free and opened it on his lap. The first page bore only a name, written in uneven block letters: Lily's notes. The words trembled with the effort of a child trying to write neatly but failing. He turned the pages slowly, his stomach knotting tighter with each drawing he uncovered. A girl, always the same girl, sitting alone at a table. A woman with hard eyes and a mouth like a blade, pointing to a puddle on the floor. A broken chair. Shoes held over a trash can. Over and over in penciled scrawls, the same phrases repeated: "I'll be good, I'm sorry, don't tell." The paper had been pressed so hard at times that it tore. Nate's jaw locked. These were not nightmares. They were memories. Fear lived in these pages, not from imagined monsters, but from people who should have been protectors. He turned another page, and his breath caught. A sketch of a woman on a park bench, her face kind, her hair long and wavy. The drawing was more detailed than any of the others. Beneath it, in shaky letters, was one word: Mom. It was not only the subject of the picture that stopped him. It was the style, the way the pencil shaded the jawline, the curve of the eyes. He knew this style. He had seen it countless times in his sister's sketches. His heart hammered as he flipped toward the back of the notebook. There, tucked between pages, was a folded slip of paper, faded and water-stained. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. Rachel Walker. The name was written across the top in swirling cursive he had not seen in years. Beneath it, in words that blurred as if time itself had wept over them, was a plea. If anything ever happens and she finds you, please protect her. Please give her the life I couldn't. Nate's world tilted. He staggered back, nearly dropping the paper. This was no stranger. The girl lying on his couch was Rachel's daughter, his niece. The notebook slipped from his hands and landed on the rug with a soft thud. He pressed a hand to his mouth. The air around him suddenly too thin, his chest too tight. Questions surged. Why had Rachel vanished without telling him? Why had she trusted him without ever reaching out? How long had this child been alone? He turned toward her again. She stirred, murmuring in her sleep, "Mom, I'm sorry." Nate's knees gave way, and he sank into the chair, covering his face with both hands. For years, he had lived like a ghost, avoiding the pain of his sister's absence by drowning in work and wealth.
It will be.
But now, fate had shattered that wall with a whisper in the snow. He stayed there through the night, unable to sleep, every flicker of her breath tethering him to a truth he could not ignore. He was not simply a man who had stumbled upon a lost child. He was an uncle given a second chance. Morning crept in quietly, pale light seeping through the frosted windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside heavy with silence and snow. Nate stood at the window, arms crossed, his eyes searching the horizon but seeing nothing. He had read Rachel's note a dozen times, each word carving deeper into him. He had not called the authorities, had not alerted the world. All he knew was that he could not let her go. Behind him, movement. He turned. The girl Lily was sitting up now, hair tangled, cheeks flushed. Her gray-green eyes, so much like Rachel's, blinked at him with uncertainty. He crouched beside her. "You're safe," he said softly. "Do you remember last night?" She nodded slowly. "I got lost." "You walked through a storm," he corrected. "That's not lost. That's surviving." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Did I ruin your house?" He swallowed, surprised at his own answer. "No, you saved it." She looked back up, her gaze sharp with disbelief, as though waiting for the catch. Then, without another word, she reached for the notebook on the table and held it to her chest. "I read some of it," Nate admitted, his voice low. "I saw your drawings." Silence stretched between them until she whispered, "Did you see the picture of my mom?" He nodded. "I think I did." "She was kind," Lily said. "Even when she was sick, she drew with me." Nate's throat tightened. "Her name was Rachel," he said, testing the truth aloud. The girl hesitated, then nodded. "Rachel Walker." Nate closed his eyes, the world pressing in on him. It was no accident. She had found him because Rachel had made sure she would. Her daughter was here because Rachel had trusted him more than he had ever trusted himself. The fire cracked softly in the hearth. Nate stood slowly, raking a hand through his hair, the weight of new responsibility pressing heavy on his shoulders. He was no longer simply a man in mourning. He was the guardian of something fragile and irreplaceable. And though he had no idea how to begin, one thing was clear. He would not let her face the world alone again. The morning light was pale and cold, spilling across the cabin in long ribbons that felt more like questions than comfort. Nate stood at the window, his arms folded, watching snow drip lazily from the eaves. The storm had passed, but its weight lingered inside him. Behind him on the couch, the child he now knew was his niece, shifted beneath a pile of blankets, clutching her notebook like a shield. He could still see Rachel's handwriting burned into his memory from the note he had read over and over during the night. "Protect her. Give her the life I couldn't." The words were a promise, a plea, and a chain around his chest. He had never asked to be anyone's guardian. He had never believed he was capable. Yet when Lily opened her eyes and looked at him, uncertain and wary, he felt the gravity of that trust settle into his bones. Her eyes, so much like Rachel's, held a quiet fear. Nate crouched beside her and spoke gently. "You're safe. No one is going to hurt you here." She nodded, but did not let go of the notebook. Later that day, he made a call to the only person he could think of, June Kelly, a neighbor tucked away further down the mountain. She was in her 50s, a retired nurse with the kind of eyes that could see through excuses. When Nate opened the door for her, the cold rushed in around her snow-dusted shoulders. She took one glance inside and understood. The child, the blankets, the worry carved into Nate's facesh needed no explanations. "Well," she said softly, brushing snow from her gloves, "this doesn't look like a board meeting." "This is Lily," Nate said simply. "She came to me in the storm. I think she's Rachel's daughter." For the first time in years, June's face faltered. She inhaled sharply, then let it out in a long breath. Rachel Walker. My God, she's been gone so long. Lily peeked out from behind the couch, her eyes wary. June crouched low, careful not to crowd her. Hi, sweetheart. I knew your mom a long time ago. May I sit with you? Lily gave the smallest nod. June sat on the floor, her voice gentle but steady, asking nothing at first, letting the silence stretch until it became safe. After a while, she glanced at Nate, her expression grim. I've heard this girl's name before. People in town said she was living with Carla and Mark Hendris, that they were fostering her. Fostering? Nate's voice cracked tight around the word. June's mouth pressed thin. They run a charity, big house, big donations, always smiling for cameras. But behind closed doors, there have been whispers for years, complaints that never stuck. Kids come and go. No one's had the courage or the proof to stop them. Nate's jaw clenched. He thought of the notebook, the drawings that had carved his chest hollow. They hurt her, he said flatly. Lily lifted her notebook and flipped to a page. She handed it to June with trembling fingers. The picture showed a house with black windows and a woman with red X's drawn over her eyes. I wasn't allowed to talk when visitors came, she whispered. If I did, I had to skip dinner. Sometimes they locked me in the laundry room. June's throat tightened, but her voice was firm. You can't send her back. I wasn't planning to. Nate's voice was iron. But child services, I'll deal with them, Snowflake. He interrupted himself, already feeling the path solidify beneath his feet. June nodded. Good, because you may be the only person who can. There was a long pause. Then Nate crouched before Lily again. Why did you come here? Why find me? Her eyes lifted, wide and vulnerable. Because my mom said, if anything bad ever happened, I should find a man named Nate. She said he lived in the mountains. She said he was good, even if he didn't know it. Nate's chest caved in. He reached for her small hand, swallowing hard.
It's Ben.
You're not going back, he said. His voice broke into a whisper. Not now. Not ever. June placed a hand on his shoulder.
It is all right.
She didn't speak, and she didn't need to. The fire crackled in the hearth, and for the first time in years, Nate felt the shape of family return. Fragile but fierce. The days that followed moved with a strange rhythm. Nate found himself making oatmeal in the mornings, folding socks that were small enough to disappear in his palm, and stirring cocoa with more cinnamon than he ever used for himself. The cabin, once sterile and untouched, began to look lived in. Crayons rolled under the counter. A pink mug appeared on the shelf with Lily's name scribbled across it. But the quiet peace did not last. One evening, headlights carved across the snow outside the window. Nate's stomach dropped before the knock even came. Carla and Mark Hendris stood on the porch, wrapped in designer coats, their anger sharp as the cold. Well, Carla snapped, this is quite an interesting little hostage situation you've created. She's not going anywhere with you, Nate said, his voice steel. She's our ward, Carla shot back, flashing a document. We are her guardians. And you? You're a bachelor executive with no experience in childcare. You think wealth makes you fit to raise her? I think abuse disqualifies you from pretending to be parents. Behind him, Lily had crept into the hallway, her notebook clutched to her chest. Nate stepped forward, his body blocking her from their view. She doesn't have a price tag, he said coldly, and you're never getting her back. Carla slapped a manila envelope onto the railing. Legal documents. If you don't return her within 48 hours, we'll file kidnapping charges. The media will eat it up. You'll regret this. Nate's hands shook, but his voice did not. I've regretted many things in my life. Not this. They stormed away, leaving threats in the snow. Inside, Lily sat cross-legged on the bed, silent, her eyes wide with fear. Nate lifted her into his arms and held her close. She buried her face in his shoulder, and in that moment, no storm, no lawsuit, no threat could make him let go. He did not know yet how far he would have to fight, but one truth had already been sealed in him as solid as stone. He was not giving her back. The courthouse in Aspen Hills was not built for grandeur. Its walls carried the smell of melted snow and old polish. Its steps cracked from years of winters that spared no one. Yet on that morning, it felt like the center of the universe. Nate Walker stood in the corridor outside courtroom B, dressed in a navy suit that fit him with the sharp precision of his corporate life. But today, the fabric felt like a costume. He was no longer the man who measured worth in stock prices. His shoulders carried something heavier, something far more fragile. Beside him, Lily clutched her small sketchbook as if it were both shield and sword. She wore a dark blue coat June had tailored to her size. Her braid was neat, her eyes wide but steady. She did not ask questions. She stayed close, every step silent yet firm. When the doors opened, the air inside was brittle with tension. The judge, Marion Ellis, a woman in her late 50s with eyes sharp enough to slice through excuses, called the session to order. Her gavel struck wood, echoing in the silence. This court is now in session for the matter of temporary custody regarding minor Lily Walker. Across the aisle, Carla and Mark Hendris sat polished and rigid, their faces sculpted into masks of righteousness. Carla's sleek hair was pulled into a knot so tight it seemed to strain her expression. Mark sat back, arms crossed, lips thin, gaze averted. Their attorney, Trent Lell, was a local predator with a voice that slithered through words. He rose first. Your Honor, my clients have provided stable housing, school enrollment, verified guardianship documents. They were never notified of Mr. Walker's intentions to disrupt custody. Furthermore, there are serious concerns about his fitness. A high-profile executive, no parental history, no preparation. This is a case of sudden guilt, not responsibility. Judge Ellis lifted a brow. And do you believe wealth disqualifies him? No, Your Honor, Lell replied smoothly. But motivation matters. This appears more like public relations than true guardianship. Nate sat still, his jaw set, his eyes forward. He had fought men like this in boardrooms, men who twisted words until truth bled out of them. But this was no corporate battle. This was his niece's life. Harper Lattimore, his attorney, stood next. Her tone was firm, calm, and deliberate. Your Honor, we have submitted medical evidence documenting signs of sustained neglect and abuse bruises in various stages of healing, undernourishment, dehydration. We also submit an affidavit from June Kelly, a retired nurse who personally cared for the child upon her arrival. The Hendrises are not guardians. They are abusers hiding behind paperwork. Judge Ellis flipped through the files, her eyes sharp, before turning back to the child seated quietly beside Nate. Lily Walker, she said gently, would you feel comfortable speaking for yourself? Lily froze. She looked up at Nate, her gray-green eyes searching his. His hand found hers, warm and steady, a silent promise. She nodded and rose. She did not walk to the witness box. Instead, she stood before the bench, sketchbook clutched to her chest. Her voice was soft, but it carried. My mom's name was Rachel. She told me that if anything ever happened, I should find my uncle. She said he was safe. Lell shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, surely. Let her speak, Judge Ellis cut in, her voice firm. Lily opened her sketchbook showing a drawing of a house on a hill. 3 figures stood before it. A woman with long hair, a small girl with a ponytail, and a tall man in a suit. Above them were the words, Me, Mom, someday. I drew this when I was with them, she whispered, motioning toward Carla and Mark without meeting their eyes. I wanted someday. But they didn't let me draw or talk much. They said I was a burden. Her voice faltered. If I spilled milk, I didn't get dinner. They locked me in the laundry room. I always had to say I was sorry. The room went silent. Carla's face tightened, her painted calm cracking. Mark stared at the floor, unmoving. Judge Ellis leaned forward. And now, Lily, how do you feel with your uncle? She glanced at Nate. He reads me stories. He listens.
Hello.
He doesn't get mad when I ask questions. I don't have to whisper anymore. Silence pressed heavy over the room, broken only by the sound of Harper's voice, steady and low. Your Honor, in addition to the testimony, we have a notarized letter written by the child's biological mother, Rachel Walker. It states clearly her wish that custody of her daughter be placed in the care of her brother, Nathaniel Walker, should anything happen. The letter was found among the child's belongings and has been authenticated. Judge Ellis tapped the bench. And what of the voicemail? Nate rose, pulling a small flip phone from his jacket. He walked to the bailiff and handed it over. The courtroom filled with static. Then Rachel's voice, cracked but unmistakably full of love. If she finds you, please, Nate, don't let her grow up thinking she's a mistake. For a moment, even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Lell shifted but said nothing. Judge Ellis folded her hands. This court finds sufficient cause to remove the minor, Lily Walker, from the custody of Carla and Mark Hendris pending further investigation. Temporary custody is granted to Nate Walker. You may proceed with filings for permanent guardianship, Carla gasped, fury twisting her face. "This is absurd. She's manipulating you. She's damaged." Judge Ellis raised her voice sharply. "That child is not on trial. You are." The gavel struck. The decision was sealed. Nate turned to Lily, her eyes wide with disbelief. He crouched and opened his arms. She ran into them, her sketchbook pressed between them. "I told you," he whispered against her hair. "You're not going anywhere." Carla stormed from the courtroom, Mark trailing behind her, silent and hollow. Tess, seated near the back, exhaled in quiet satisfaction, her eyes shining with something fierce. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady this time, no longer threatening but cleansing. On the steps, Lily looked up at Nate. "Are we really going home?" "We are," he said, his voice certain. Her smile was small at first, hesitant, the kind of smile that didn't yet believe it was safe. But then it grew, slow and real, stretching across her face like sunlight breaking through clouds. And in that moment, Nate felt like a man transformed, not a CEO, not a failure haunted by the past, but a guardian, a brother fulfilling a promise, and at last, a home. The cabin no longer felt like a cold retreat for a man running from his past. It was changing room by room, heartbeat by heartbeat. The kitchen that once smelled only of sterile granite and steel now carried the warmth of cinnamon, maple, and honey. Each morning, Lily would tiptoe in with mismatched socks, her small voice asking if they could have oatmeal with strawberries again. Nate made coffee for himself and cider for her, and they sat together at the table in a silence that was no longer heavy but alive, the kind that held comfort instead of absence. The walls, once bare, had begun to carry color. Lily's drawings were taped crookedly across the living room. Star-filled skies, stick-figure families, a yellow house with a red roof labeled ours. Her laughter threaded through the cabin like music Nate had not heard in decades. Every time her hand slipped into his when they walked across the icy path, he felt the measure of his life shifting away from market caps and profits towards something far less tangible but infinitely more real. June became a steady visitor, arriving with bread still warm from the oven, new mittens, or sometimes nothing but her quiet company. She said little, but when she looked at Nate, watching Lily draw or read, her smile carried an approval that spoke louder than words. One afternoon, she placed cinnamon bread on the counter and said softly, "You're not just healing her, she's healing you too." Nate wanted to argue, but the truth of it was too evident. Tess managed his schedule remotely now, her presence still sharp but softened by something new. She told him bluntly during one of their calls, "Your priorities have shifted, and honestly, it's about time." And he didn't deny it. Nights that were once consumed by quarterly earnings and board strategies were now spent reading children's books aloud, his voice stumbling over dragon names but steady when he saw Lily's eyes light up at the stories. But with each step into this new life, shadows of Rachel lingered. Late one evening, while Lily slept with her arms wrapped around the stuffed bear June had given her, Nate opened a storage box he had avoided for years. Inside were journals, sketches, and an old flip phone. Against his better judgment, he charged it, the red light blinking alive like a ghost returning. The voicemail came after static, Rachel's voice worn but tender. "Nate, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't get to explain. I'm sorry. I was scared you wouldn't forgive me for running, for not calling. But I had Lily, and I needed to protect her. She hums when she draws. She misses being noticed. I told her about you. I told her you were kind. You'll deny it, but you were always the best of us. If she finds you, please, don't let her grow up thinking she's a mistake." The message ended, and for the first time in years, Nate wept. His hands trembled as he pressed the phone to his chest, grief and regret tearing through him in waves. Yet beneath it all was a fragile thread of something else hope. Rachel had believed in him, even when he had abandoned belief in himself. The next day, Lily showed him another drawing. It was simple. 3 figures, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a girl with a ponytail, standing in a field beneath a bright sun. Above them, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Someday is now." Nate stared at it for a long moment before he whispered, "Do you really think so?" She nodded without hesitation. "We're already here." Life inside the cabin fell into rhythms neither of them expected. Lily began to fall asleep, not with fear, but with wonder. Her eyes closing beneath constellations, Nate projected onto her ceiling each night. She liked the stars to move slowly, like the sky itself was alive just for her. Nate sat beside her until she drifted off, his presence steady, his heart shifting into a role he had never prepared for but now embraced.
Love isn't something
Tess
you
returned
earn.
briefly from the
It's just
city,
given.
stepping into the cabin with suspicion until she saw Lily coloring quietly at the table. She had once known Nate only as the relentless CEO who never stopped moving. Now she saw a man crouched beside a child, guiding her hand across a page with patience she never imagined he possessed. "This is different," she murmured almost to herself. In quieter moments, Nate researched late into the night. Not about mergers or technology, but about child development, trauma recovery, and adoption law. He read about stability, about how structure and consistency could mend what fear had fractured. He studied not to win a market, but to understand how to build a life that would allow Lily to trust the world again. One Saturday, she placed another drawing in his hands. This one showed only two figures, a tall man holding the hand of a little girl. Above them, in looping pencil strokes, were the words "Someday is now." He had no words, only a sharp ache behind his eyes as he folded the paper carefully, like something sacred. At night, when she asked if he thought her mother would be proud, Nate brushed a hand across her forehead and whispered, "I think she already is. I think she sent you to remind me what matters." She would smile, turn toward her ceiling full of stars, and drift into sleep, safe. And so, the cabin became not a refuge from the world, but the center of one. The rooms filled with traces of life. Toast crumbs on the counter, cocoa stains on mugs, crayons scattered like tiny footprints across the floor. The silence that had once haunted every corner was gone, replaced with laughter, with soft questions asked without fear, with the gentle rhythm of a family learning itself into existence. The man who had once believed himself defined by ambition now found that his worth was measured in the weight of a child's hand, the sound of her humming as she drew, and the fragile yet fierce truth that someday had finally arrived. Snow still lingered in Aspen Hills, though by March it drifted down in soft flakes that looked more like powdered sugar than a storm. The mountains stood quiet, the trees bowed under a light dusting of white. Inside Nate Walker's cabin, warmth filled every corner. The air smelled of tea and cinnamon, the kind of scent that wrapped itself around you like a blanket. On the dining table, Lily was decorating cupcakes with careful hands, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. She pressed a tiny sugar star on top of the blue frosting and announced proudly, "This one's for June." Nate, rinsing mixing bowls at the sink, smiled. "And the green one's for Tess. She earned it after untangling 400 pages of tax records this week." Lily grinned, pleased with her careful work. "We should make one for Harper too, even if she's not here." They were preparing for something new, something bigger than either of them had dared imagine when she first arrived trembling in the snow. The Rachel Foundation was real now, not just an idea whispered in grief, but a living effort to build safety nets for children like Lily, children who had been forgotten or hidden in the cracks of a system that claimed to protect them. The cabin hummed with quiet energy as neighbors and strangers began to arrive, drawn not by Nate's name or fortune, but by the story of a girl who had braved a storm to find him. June was first, cheeks pink from the cold, carrying her famous stew. Tess followed with her laptop and a binder of documents, still managing Nate's chaotic life, but now with a patience that had never been required before. Then came others, a retired teacher offering tutoring, a baker with fresh loaves of bread, a counselor carrying toys for a reading corner. People who once saw Nate Walker only as the tech mogul on the hill now saw a man who had opened his home and heart because of one small girl. As the night unfolded, laughter filled the cabin. Lily darted between guests with cautious excitement, showing drawings, offering cupcakes, asking questions. She no longer shrank into silence at the sight of strangers. She was becoming herself again, piece by piece. Nate watched her from across the room, his chest heavy with something he could not name. Something stronger than pride, something closer to awe. Later, when the last guests left and the snow outside caught the last threads of twilight, Nate stood by the window holding a stack of papers. Custody documents. Signed, sealed, official. He read the name printed clearly at the top, Lily Grace Walker. Something inside him settled, a weight both lifted and made permanent. He turned to her, still curled on the couch with her notebook. "Do you want to see something?" he asked. She took the papers, her lips moving silently as she traced the letters with her finger. Then she looked up, her voice trembling. "It's real? It's real," he said. Her arms closed around the papers as if they were a treasure map. "I don't have to leave." "Never," he whispered. "You're home." That night, after brushing her teeth and lining up her colored pencils in the precise order she liked, Lily climbed into bed with her stuffed bear, now threadbare and missing one eye. Nate sat beside her as the projector spilled constellations across the ceiling. She stared up at them, blinking slowly. After a long silence, she whispered, "Do you remember what I said when you found me?" Nate turned to her. "I remember a lot of things. I said, 'I'm sorry, Mom, I'll be good.'" Her voice was fragile, breaking against the memory. "I used to think I had to be good to be loved." Nate reached for her hand, his own steady. "You were always worthy of love, Lily. You don't earn that. You deserve it just by being you." A single tear slipped across her temple, but she smiled faintly. "And you heard me even when I was whispering." He swallowed the tightness in his throat. "You changed everything with that whisper." Her eyes closed, her breathing evened out, and the stars drifted lazily above her. Nate sat for a while longer, his hand resting lightly on the blanket over hers. In the quiet, he thought of Rachel, of the letter, of the voicemail that still echoed in his chest. He thought of promises broken and promises redeemed. And he thought of how a life defined by ambition had been remade by a single child's voice in the snow. In the days that followed, the cabin became not only their home, but the heart of something wider. The Rachel Foundation took root. The sign outside, painted by Lily in bright green letters, read, "Where Someday Happens." Volunteers came, not out of obligation, but out of belief in the story that had already begun to ripple outward. Nate no longer cared for headlines or accolades. He cared for mornings where Lily stirred oatmeal beside him, afternoons where her drawings piled across the coffee table, evenings when she leaned against his arm as he read aloud. His life was measured now in the sound of her laughter, the strength of her trust, the fragile courage of her healing. One night, while sorting through old boxes, he found a photo of himself and Rachel as teenagers leaning against a truck in the summer sun. Underneath her messy handwriting had scrawled one word, "Home." He carried it to Lily's room, where she was waiting for her nightly sky. He handed her the photo and a glue stick. "Do you want to start a scrapbook?" he asked. Her eyes lit up, and she pressed the photo carefully onto a blank page of her notebook. Together, they began what Rachel had started but never finished. A story not of absence, but of return. The snow outside fell softly that night, not as a threat, but as a blessing. And Nate, watching Lily smile at the ceiling stars, knew that miracles did not always arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they came as whispers in the dark, as drawings in pencil, as second chances wrapped in the fragile hands of a child who had finally found her way home. The storm that began this story was more than weather. It was a reflection of two hearts adrift, one weighed down by guilt and silence, the other by fear and loneliness. A man who thought he had lost his chance to love again, and a child who believed she had to apologize just to be seen, found each other in the coldest of nights. Out of brokenness, they created something whole. Nate Walker, once defined by power and wealth, discovered that true strength is measured not in numbers or contracts, but in the courage to love someone who depends on you. And Lily, once convinced she had to whisper apologies into the dark, learned that she never had to earn love, it was hers by right, simply because she existed. The cabin on the hill, once silent and sterile, is no longer just a place of retreat. It has become a home alive with drawings, cocoa, and laughter. Its walls now carry the sound of stories read aloud, the smell of cinnamon bread shared with friends, and the soft hum of healing. Where there was emptiness, there is now warmth. Where there was grief, there is now hope. But their story is more than just theirs. It is a reminder to each of us that second chances are possible, that even when the night feels endless and the snow threatens to bury us, light can break through in the simplest of ways of voice. A drawing, a hand reaching for another. Sometimes redemption doesn't come in grand gestures, but in small acts of presence, of refusing to walk away when someone whispers for help. Perhaps the greatest miracle is not that Nate saved Lily, but that Lily saved Nate. She gave him a reason to stop running, to face his past, to embrace the love he thought he no longer deserved. Together, they proved that healing is not a solitary act, It is something we build with one another, one promise, one moment of trust at a time. And so, as snow continues to fall softly outside their cabin, life goes on. The Rachel Foundation grows, reaching children who once believed they were forgotten. Lily dreams beneath her star-filled ceiling, no longer afraid of the dark. Nate watches over her, not as a CEO, not as a man haunted by regret, but as the guardian Rachel always knew he could become. Their story is not the end. It is the beginning of something larger, proof that love can rise out of silence, that home can be built from ashes, that healing is possible for us all. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the strength that can be found in love and second chances, we invite you to join us. Subscribe to Loss and Healing and continue walking with us through stories that reveal the power of hope, redemption, and the simple miracles that change lives. Because sometimes, all it takes is one whisper in the snow to remind us what truly matters.